Good day. I hope that we can provide you as a peer specialist working in the housing projects with some valuable information and tools that will help you in your work with fellow veterans. Our panel today is members of the faculty and students of the University of South Florida who have a special interest in working with veterans. And they have a rich background of experiences that should be very valuable for our discussion. I will not spend a great deal of time introducing the members of the panel, but just very briefly, starting to my far left is Dr. Kaya Connor, a new faculty member here at the University of South Florida from previously the University of Pittsburgh. And she does a great deal of research and work regarding trauma and services to families who are veterans or civilians in the needing mental health services. Dr. Herbert Exum is faculty member here at the University of South Florida in counselor education. And he, like myself, date back to the veterans of the Vietnam era, and we have worked for years, and Dr. Exum is going to share with us much of his experiences working with veterans in a program in Raleigh, North Carolina. Dr. Carlos Zaliquet is also a professor in the counselor education department and is experienced coming from a background where he saw, although not a veteran, saw many issues and experiences the trauma of revolutionary South America and has many experiences coordinating programs for veterans. Dr. Joanna Anton is one of our graduates, and she is working in a Housing First project in Pinellas County, Florida, where she serves veterans and their families, trying to assist them in reintegration and to obtain housing. Tony Rivera is with us from here at the University of South Florida, where he heads up the Office of Veteran Services to assist students coming to the university with reintegration and especially adjustment to being a student in our university. So we're going to talk today, and I'm going to start out by asking some general questions to focus on issues around the barriers that veterans might experience as they attempt to reintegrate after deployment or general services as a veteran. The purpose of this presentation is to help you as a caregiver to better understand how cultural issues may be faced by the returning veteran and how these may create barriers or hurdles that the person may have to deal with as they reintegrate. So let's get started, panel. We want to first sort of define where we are. So, Dr. Zaliquet, let me ask you to tell us a little bit about why are these cultural issues important for us to consider when we're working with the returning vet?
Now, let me begin by saying that that's an excellent question. What I see as I work with many different organizations and professionals who very genuinely wants to help returning vets to reinsert, find a career in the civilian world, find housing, get an education, we fail to understand that military professionals and their families has been socialized to hold a worldview that is not necessarily synonym of the worldview that civilians will have. So they see life in a very structured, organized way, for example, if you look at how the military and the armed forces are structured. And now, after serving, they are coming back to reinsert themselves in a different type of context. The other issue is that the professionals who are supposed to serve them seem to forget sometimes, or maybe they don't really grasp this different worldview. There are other issues related with diversity. The military is highly diversified, interestingly enough. And a number of the issues that you see outside in the general community that shows tension between different ethnic and racial groups, for example, sometimes they are actually ironed out in a combat experience where everybody needs to rely on each other. And so the camaraderie, the connection, etc., creates a different type of culture.
Yes, Dr. Zilquit, you mentioned that combat forges that relationship. The barriers are broken. There's no, I'm Hispanic, he's black, he's white, Asian, what have you. That kind of, it goes further. I was a drill sergeant for a short period of time, and the breaking down of the personality, the individual, and creating a team work environment, that starts from day one. Literally, they get off the bus, we shave their heads, everyone looks the same, they're all put in uniform. It's quite comical to see this happen, where you see the relationships forming. People from all over. We have veterans, military personnel that joined, never been on an airplane, that was the first time on an airplane, never seen the ocean. All over the country, there's such diverse backgrounds, and you bring them all together, 9 times out of 10 it's in a basement. And you put them in there, there's a bunch of bunks, and you tell them, you go here, you go there, you go here, you go there. And they form this bond, and they have a common denominator, and it's that drill sergeant. And we're here yelling and barking at them, giving them impossible tasks to complete with not enough time to complete, and we know it's not going to happen, but we want to see how they forge that relationship and start building that bond and relying on each other, exploiting their expertise. Or you're good at this, you do handle that, I know how to do this, I'll handle this. So we start building that right from the get-go. So once we have that solid foundation there, and they move on to going into their combat units, or they go overseas to Iraq or Afghanistan, those relationships just become stronger. Those relationships, their bond becomes, even though they may have been at different basic training units, they understand the importance of each person's position and the team concept. Everything's team. Another thing you point out was very interesting is there's a lot of resources, we know that. I know that from our office. There's the VA, there's civilian side of the house, there's the counselors you have here that are interested in the studies. We as military personnel, being in the military, we're often told to suck it up. Mm-hmm. We're often told, oh, you're hurting? Drive on, you can do it, you can manage. You don't want to show that weakness. Or you associate that mental or PTSD, mental issues or depression as a weakness. And I'm fine, I can suck it up. And you could just only take it so much. I often refer to that as the soda bottle. You shake it up, there's just so much pressure, eventually it's going to burst. And we have that where, oh, I don't need it, so I'm not going to look for those. I don't need it, I'm fine. I got guys that went down range with me, and they're doing fine, they're still serving, they're still going to combat. They believe that they can handle it on their own. So they don't feel that they need those resources until it's sometimes too late.
Working with the elders of color that I've come from in my clinical practice, a great many of them were veterans and talked a great deal about sort of the shift from being in the military environment into coming back into a civilian life. My clients were largely African American elders, and I think it's really fascinating, this idea of when you're in the military, some of these personality traits and this kind of racial ethnic differences are sort of washed away, and everyone is seen as equal. I have to have your back, you have to have mine. So we're not looking at sort of these other issues. But when they come back, those issues remain. Being an African American veteran doesn't eliminate them from experiencing discrimination and racism once they are here. There is still a great amount of inequality, income inequalities, education inequalities, economic and job issues, unequal income for similar education and similar jobs. So I think in some sense, it's interesting for some of these individuals who come back, who are serving their country, to come back to a country that doesn't fight for their rights to be equal citizens in this country, and having to shift from being able to see people as we're all the same to now recognizing I still have to deal with these sort of cultural, racial, ethnic discrimination issues in this country can be a significant challenge and can exacerbate some of the anxiety, the depression, the other things that are just, inhibiting that reintegration process in a successful way.
Dr. Seliquet, when we define culture, it's more than just skin color or what language you speak and so forth, but I was thinking about some of your work with persons with varying religion, about sexual identity. These are all defined as cultural issues as well as.
Oh, very good. I think that the definition of multiculturalism, or the cultural concept, has been expanded from race and ethnicity to encompass all cultural factors. And you have age, you have gender. It's interesting how the idea of gender becomes very central, for the veteran. In a number of situations, even though we still have some gender differential guidelines within the military, it happens in real life that those differences gets erased. Let me give you an example. The front line in many of the war scenarios is very blurred. So you may think that if you are a woman, you may not be sent to the active front line, except that you may be driving on a side road and be involved in a flat-out combat situation, disregarding of your gender. So men and women develop a more cohesive integration in the military context and the armed forces in general context. When they come back, as you were mentioning before, number of the gender issues become much more salient, much more relevant to them, because there is still, a society that tends to benefit a male perspective or standard versus a women's standard. And we see that in differences in work opportunities, promotion, and also salary. Women are still receiving, a sizable difference in terms of salary for the same work done. So you are correct in the sense that multiculturalist theorists have expanded them to include these, and they have developed very interesting acronyms, like for example the respectful model, where race and ethnicity, you also have age, you also have gender, you also have lifestyle. And age, for example, is important. You mentioned older veterans who get together, on a line for services, and you say, well, this is where older vets. Well, older vets actually require a different type of service than younger vets, just by virtue of the changes they experience as they mature and grow. So yes, the cultural definition is now much wider than it was before, including religion, for example, and also socioeconomic level. And as you can imagine, there are big socioeconomic differences between the veterans who serve, because we have veterans from all sections of the socioeconomic spectrum, but also we understand that in some cases they come back to very different socioeconomic contexts and opportunities. That's where education becomes an opportunity for them to take advantage of the VA services and get the skills that they can apply in the social new context of the civilian life, or transfer the skills that they have developed in the military into an effective type of profession in the civilian life. So yes, culture has become wider as an understanding.
Dr. Exum is speaking of older veterans, since you and I fit that category. Can you share with some of your experience working with the older vet?
But in terms of the older vets, the people I've worked with, you know, they still have that sense of camaraderie, you know, even after 40 years. You know, they still talk about the issues that were important to them. And the hardest thing that I found out from them that had to do with their reintegration was really their code of honor. And I'll say this in a particular way. Many of them were sworn to secrecy about all sorts of things, and these can be key elements in their therapy, but they will never say what they were, because 50 years later, they say, I swore an oath, so I won't talk about it. And it's all of these things that are there, and you just say, I know you're suffering, and if you would just speak about this, maybe we could help relieve it. And they say, I cannot. You know, and these are people who I know trust me at this point. They just, they know I'm not going to go tell somebody this, but I swore I couldn't do it. And so I cannot do it. You know, and that has always been so sorrowful for me to see someone like that when they're right on the edge and they can't be free of things like that. You know, but again, in terms of working, they usually got back into society, you know, by hook or crook, and they usually worked 3 or 4 jobs because they couldn't sleep and they couldn't really deal with regular society. So if they worked constantly, then they could provide for their families and never really have to deal with anything. You know, and so, you know, and they worked as much as possible to make sure that they could do something that was proactive, I mean, do something that was positive, but at the same time, not have to deal with the things that really bother them. And most of those things were interpersonal relationships and not trusting civilians. And I can see why they wouldn't, because it really is true that civilians are disorganized. You know, civilians are really unreliable. You know, and civilians aren't really serious about things in the military sense. It's because we don't really work under the type of pressure that a service member has to go when they're deployed. They learn another way of behaving that's efficient and it takes care of everybody.
It reminds me some of your comments about the person who has schizophrenia. And this is a horrible illness that's maybe for many people lifelong. But the worst part of the illness is to deal with the stigma of how society sees someone with a mental illness.
I do a lot of research in the area of stigma, as you just mentioned. And, you know, the issue of public stigma is incredibly relevant. This idea of what other people are going to think about me because I have a mental illness. What are they going to say? What, you know, are they going to be prejudiced? Are they going to think that I'm crazy, I'm violent, I'm unstable, I can't be trusted? But there's this other concept of an internalized stigma, which is when an individual takes these sort of views that they believe society has about them and they begin to internalize them and believe them themselves. We see this to be particularly salient for racial and ethnic minorities who tend to associate a great deal of shame and embarrassment with identifying themselves as having a mental health condition or identifying themselves as someone who needs mental health treatment. In fact, there was a study done by Mental Health America that found that 63% of African Americans identified depression as a personal weakness, as something that they should be in control over and should be able to just get over on their own. So there's a huge issue with those sort of beliefs. In particular, internalized stigma seems to be more directly related to treatment-seeking attitudes and behaviors. It's not just what other people believe, because if other people believe it but I don't, it's not going to affect me. But when I start to believe it, then now this is going to have an impact on my attitudes about treatment and treatment-seeking behaviors. So we have this huge barrier to getting people even in the door to be able to have these discussions about health and mental health. This stigma creates this huge deterrent to treatment seeking. And we see stigma as an issue for all people, but again, in particular for racial and ethnic minorities, there's a huge stigma component and a belief that even before I've gone to the military and have taken these sort of oaths to kind of keep this here, in the Black community, we don't talk about mental health stuff. Veteran or not, we don't talk about what's going on emotionally and in our minds, these sort of private thoughts. We keep those behind closed doors. So you have now these double hurdles to get through in therapy and wanting people to open up and share and to talk about their experiences. And so it becomes incredibly difficult as a clinician knowing that you have treatments that are effective and that work and can help people, but you can't get them to the people who need them. And once they're there, there's still barriers getting that treatment to be successful. And involving the family, I have seen, has always been a helpful approach. But again, you know, when family members are carrying sort of anti-military attitudes and don't want to necessarily talk about or be bothered with issues, then it creates an even more critical issue for this veteran who's coming home to a family who just kind of wants to just move on from this and doesn't want to deal with the reality of what that person is going through. So it's a difficult situation.
When you deal with female veterans who are homeless, who a lot of them won't even identify as being veteran, like, we literally have to pull teeth on, well, did you serve? Well, yeah, but I was only there for a couple of years and I only did this. But you're in the military. That makes you a veteran. And a lot of the females that we work with, there's very few of them, they won't come out and say, yeah, I'm a veteran, I could use the help, because they think, well, I'm a female, I don't really need that. And when it comes to families, a single male veteran is more apt to say, yeah, help me. I'm a veteran, I can use this. But when it comes to, now it's a family, your dad, you have your wife, you have your children, it makes it harder sometimes to help them because they have this mentality of, I should be the one providing for my family, not this person or that organization.
Dr. Connor, you bring up a great point about the stigma and breaking that threshold of actually coming to see someone for help. I've seen this time and time again. Many of our student veterans will be reluctant to go seek help because they don't want to get branded or labeled. I have PTSD. They're afraid of losing their security clearances. They're afraid to, if they want to go into law enforcement, they're afraid to have that stigma, you know, where I will not get a job or they will look at me differently. Why, you know, you're seeking help? What's the reason? I go to the VA, or you must be getting help, mental health services. So they pull back from that and they try to, in some cases, self-medicate. In other cases, they bond with other veterans or connect and kind of share those small stories and kind of do some healing on their own. My grandfather's a veteran as well, World War II. He passed away a couple years ago. And he often told me when I came back from Iraq, he says, you know, it's a lot different for me than it is for you. My generation, a good majority of us went over to either Europe or out in the Japan area. He said it was different. Our neighbors all went, fellow classmates went. So when we came home, yeah, we grieved the loss for those who were killed in battle. But we were able to heal each other, and that's when you saw the VFWs or American Legions, and they did their healing internally. They didn't have the services that you provide now. So my generation of these Iraq and Afghanistan veterans coming back, they don't see the need for it because that suck it up mentality, or they're afraid of getting that stigma. And they're also afraid of what the media portrays. You know, I think that has a very big, it's a very big hurdle for a veteran. You know, if a person goes out and commits a crime, they say so and so committed a crime. If he happens to be a veteran, you better believe they're going to put in there, he was a Marine, or he was in the Army, or he was this, or he was that, or she was this. And that gets labeled. And they do the same thing in law enforcement. You know, if a police officer gets pulled over for driving while intoxicated, he's on the front page. Right. Tony Rivera gets pulled over for driving intoxicated, I'm lucky I make the police blotter. So, you know, there's a difference there, and we understand that. But that carries a lot of weight.
And focus on how the community integration specialist, the peer specialist, can best deal with these issues when working with their fellow vet. Now I'd like for us to focus on the skills that a community integration specialist may need to work with other vets who are going through the process of reintegration, and keeping in mind the issues of stigma, the various barriers that the veteran might be facing. We are very aware that we are trying to prepare peer specialists who themselves are not professionally trained in counseling, but have the natural abilities often to be a helper, and they are taking these roles of helping other vets in these housing programs. So what can we think are some of the skills, some of the issues that the helper needs to consider when they are working with fellow vets?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the peer helper needs to have some sense of self-care. Needs to have a self-care plan. And the reason the person needs to do this is that, yes, we know they're well qualified to work with other veterans because of common experiences, but long-term work with other veterans over a number of issues really can be draining. And the person needs to know how to deal with the stresses that come about actually by working with other people over a long period of time, because they'll be enthusiastic and they'll want to do their best and they'll want to make the mission work, but they'll forget that they're the only one doing the mission and they don't have a backup, so they have to have a self-care plan. They have to have a way of making sure that their physical, psychological, and their spiritual health is intact.
You have to build that trust. We build that trust in our office and when I help a veteran, and I'm not afraid to share portions of my story to help build that trust, to break that barrier down. I have that connection, so a peer specialist has that connection already. We know that they're a veteran. My experience as a veteran going to Iraq is a lot different from the person that might have been right alongside me, but we still have that bond, we still have that connection. So breaking down that barrier and building that bond and that trust, and what goes along with that is once that trust is built, you got to be able to ask the hard question. In the military, as NCOs, as non-commissioned officers or officers, someone in a leadership position, we've gone through tons of training in respects to asking the hard question. How are you feeling today? Are you feeling suicidal? You're not so much trained, and we don't want to go down that line, but you have that trust. Are you okay today? All right. No. Are you okay today? You don't have to ask them. You know, you're not trained in that lane to ask those tough questions. In the military, an NCO has to. If we notice a soldier or a Marine start giving away their belongings, you know what? I don't want that video game anymore. It's all yours. Start giving away some of their prized possessions. That's what indicators that something may be happening. And we've experienced that firsthand here on campus with a student wanting to give away his education benefits to his child. And a little bit more digging, a little bit more prying, and asking those hard questions. What do you mean by this? Sit down, let's talk. Let's share this. So you have to develop the relationship and be willing to ask those hard questions. And then refer them. You know, have that referral. You're not the subject matter expert. Have that person in your back pocket. You want to speak to so-and-so here.
That's a good point. We are not expecting the peer specialist to be an expert and be able to help in cases such as in a veteran who has suicidal thought. But they need to know when to go back to the team at the VA and to get the team involved in providing the support services that are needed.
When in doubt, always refer. That's what we do.
Good,
always in doubt.
Good direction.
You don't have that warm and fuzzy about this person. Would you please talk to him, sir, or doctor, or whomever you're referring? Please talk to him. Just give him a moment of your time. That's all, that just being able to do that and understand that.
I liked your first point too, that the relationship is so important.
Absolutely.
I think research has shown us that you can be any type of therapist, use any techniques and theories, but the real important issue is the therapeutic relationship that you have with
have
the
to
person
have
you're
it.
trying to help.
You have to build that trust, build that bond. And it works in both ways. You know, we have that camaraderie, cross branches. You know, we make fun of each other, whether you're Army and Navy, we'll make fun of each other. Air Force, we'll make fun of each other. But that bond is still there, that connection's there. Maybe that's the way you break it out, to bring it into conversation. Oh, you were in the Army, I was a Marine, we're better than you, you know. And you have that fun little banter going on. And the camaraderie's there, and you develop that relationship. And you have to, that's the cornerstone.
If I can just add about the developing of the relationship and sort of bringing back some of our old conversation on culture and race and ethnicity issues. You know, there's absolutely no evidence that suggests that racial match is a necessary component for people to have great outcomes in peer support or in clinical services. But research does tend to suggest that participants who have a racial match in a provider or a peer specialist tend to rate that relationship as being somewhat more positive, or more, they feel more engaged. They feel that this person understands them on various levels. And so I think also it's, you know, we talked about the connection of being a veteran, and that's a really important key piece. It resonates.
Yeah.
So the race ethnicity issue may not play as significant a factor, but it still is a factor.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's important for peer specialists to not go in with this idea of being colorblind. I think oftentimes we spend so much time in social services and in academics talking about we don't need to see color, but in reality I think that that's not a culturally competent stance. It's not about saying we don't see color, but it's saying we see it and I value it. I see it and I appreciate it. I see it and I want to learn more about it, and I want to understand your unique experiences, and being comfortable putting those conversations on the table and creating a safe space for peers to be able to talk about those issues, even if the specialist is from a different racial or ethnic background, is important.
And this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. And boo-boo on me, because you taught us about establishing clear boundaries.
Yes.
And with my job as a housing specialist, we have 5 case managers and only 1 of me. So all of their cases get referred to me. And there are some cases that I get a little bit more attached to than others. And they call you, and I have a work phone as well, and that I have now learned to turn off. And it was a hard thing to learn, because we are all in this not to get rich, but to help. And so to me now, coming out and learning that the hard way, I had to establish, as a peer specialist, you have to establish clear boundaries, that you cannot call me in the middle of the night unless it's a specific emergency. That I'm not just, it gets a little bit, there's like a very fine line between you're wanting to be in my personal life as opposed to I'm here to help you. And that, I guess, it gets blurred out just because I'm here showing them their house.
Yeah.
This is where you're going to be living. So they in turn think that, well, are you going to come over and have dinner once I moved in? Are you going to take your son? Can I meet him? You know, you're like family. And no, I'm here as a support person, but not that close. And the other thing, to touch base on what Tony said, that I've learned as other case managers are dealing with difficult clients, and a lot of them is the case managers that are not veterans, and they have a hard time talking to clients, or the clients to talk to them and essentially divulge whatever they need to say. And listening goes a long way. And sometimes it doesn't even matter that I'm a veteran. That's why they're telling me all their secrets or some things that they didn't want to tell their case managers. It's just they needed to feel like you're listening, and what they're saying, as small as it could be, that it is important, and to not take that for granted, and to just kind of one question can go a long way, and next thing you know, I always get the question of, how did you know that? And I just sat there and I asked one question, and after that it's just kind of, okay, so then tell me what happened after that. It's not even a specific question, it's just you sit and you listen, and they haven't had anyone listen to them in a long time, so as a peer specialist, you're there, you know, they know that you have their back, and now you're listening, and that kind of establishes and solidifies that trust.
Oh, what I was getting ready to comment on was when you were talking about asking questions. I was thinking about the helper doesn't have to be and can't be an expert in and have knowledge of every different cultural situation or belief system or values. But why not ask? Is that if I have a client who is from the Jehovah Witness faith or the Mormon faith, and it's okay for me to say, I'm not sure if I understand. Can you share with me a little bit about your religious beliefs?
It's building relationship, is showing respect. You know, hey, I want to learn a little bit about you so we can move forward and get to that goal, whatever that goal may be. I think it's a great tool to have in your tool belt. Just being willing to ask, hey, you know, I'm not trying to mock you, make fun of you, but tell me a little bit more about it because I don't understand it.
One of the things that we consistently have found is that the most salient and powerful factor to mitigate the effect of stigma is contact with another person who, quote unquote, shares my stigma. And so peer specialists are an incredibly unique opportunity to talk to someone, not only who has a similar experience as being a veteran, but someone who has dealt with mental health issues. And if you are comfortable sharing that experience, talking about what you went through, talking about the different treatment that you may have had and what it was like and how it was helpful, and can answer questions that someone might feel uncomfortable going to immediately to a professional mental health service provider to find out, that's just a wonderful opportunity to right then begin to mitigate the impact of stigma and help improve attitudes about seeking professional mental health services. And so I think that that's an incredibly important component, not just being willing to share experiences with their time in service, but being willing to share their experiences with any mental health concerns or issues they had integrating back into civilian life. It will go a long way towards helping the peer that they're working with in their own recovery process. One of the things that we consistently have found is that the most salient and powerful factor to mitigate the effect of stigma is contact with another person who, quote unquote, shares my stigma. And so peer specialists are an incredibly unique opportunity to talk to someone, not only who has a similar experience as being a veteran, but someone who has dealt with mental health issues. And if you are comfortable sharing that experience, talking about what you went through, talking about the different treatment that you may have had and what it was like and how it was helpful, and can answer questions that someone might feel uncomfortable going to immediately to a professional mental health service provider to find out, that's just a wonderful opportunity to right then begin to mitigate the impact of stigma and help improve attitudes about seeking professional mental health services. And so I think that that's an incredibly important component, not just being willing to share experiences with their time in service, but being willing to share their experiences with any mental health concerns or issues they had integrating back into civilian life. It will go a long way towards helping the peer that they're working with in their own recovery process.
Adding to what Dr. Connor said, recently I've been working with families, and a lot of them are the moms that get overwhelmed because they're moms, you have to provide for your children and take care of them and everything, and I look younger than how I really am, and a lot of the veterans that I work with don't realize that I'm a veteran as well, and the attitude completely changes once they realize, oh, you're a veteran. Oh, you're a single mom. Okay, well, maybe you're not, as stupid, for lack of a better term, as you may be. And it changes a lot on how they are motivated and what they want to do when you tell them, listen, you're starting over, you are homeless, you're living in a shelter, you have kids. I've been there.
Right.
I've done that. I've packed up all of my stuff in my car, whatever I could fit with my son, and move to a place I didn't know. But those are just things, and kind of empowering them and showing them, hey, you may not have the big house, the nice car, the great job, the money and everything, but you have your family, you have your kids, you may not be 100% well, but there is help, and we are here to alleviate that stress. So take a deep breath. Let's focus one thing at a time, because it gets overwhelming. And that's the thing about when, and we've all been there, Tony and myself have been there, when you go into a new place, you think about everything, because I think we're all trained, being in the military, you'll go into a room, you look it over, you look at everything that needs to be done, and that gets overwhelming. And so it's kind of like you have to reel them in and be like, it's overwhelming if you think about it all at once, but here's the plan. Let's focus on the most important thing. Let's house you. The next thing, let's get you a job or some kind of benefit so you have some kind of income. One thing at a time, and it gets to be not as overwhelming, and it's more doable, and you see the goal and you see the steps that you need to take it, and that makes it a little bit more kind of easy. And sometimes as a housing specialist, and I work with our peer specialists as well, that's kind of our job, and same thing for our case managers, is to kind of reel them back in and be like, take a deep breath, it's not as overwhelming, here is why, and just kind of showing to them that they may think that they have nothing going for them, but they do have some good, despite of maybe they don't see that at all, and just kind of guiding them to see that.
Panel, thank you so much. This has been very useful. I think that this gives some more tools to for the tool belt of the peer specialist, and we thank you for your input, and we will make this available to the Veterans Administration as a product from the University of South Florida, and we again appreciate your help.